All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today for our professional development webinar, Boost Your Emotional Intelligence to Drive Performance and Partnership. My name is Dan Gardner, and I'm a member of the Alumni Career Programs team here in the Office of Alumni Relations. Today's webinar is sponsored by Boston University Alumni Relations and is offered to our 335,000 alumni all around the globe. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. We aim to do this by providing alumni with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. I know we have alumni joining us today from faraway places like Dubai, Calgary, Beijing, Bogota, London, Tegucigalpa, Dublin, Reykjavik, Singapore, and all across the United States as well, Scottsdale, Arizona, Laguna Beach, California, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Lincoln, Nebraska, and as always, dozens of Massachusetts alumni from towns like Shrewsbury, Somerville, South Boston, Southeaston, Southampton, Southborough, Sudbury, and many, many more. For each and every one of you out there, please know that we really do value your opinion on this and every program that we offer. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, some brief housekeeping notes. As you know by now, this webinar is hosted on our Zoom online meeting platform. And if you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of today's presentation, I'll ask that you please contact Zoom support. You can see the number right there on your screen. It's 1-888-799-9666. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be available for on-demand viewing on the Alumni Association website. You can find it at bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions that you might have, and you can submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A box. You can find this just by hovering over either the top or bottom of your screen and selecting Q&A. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, College of Fine Arts alumnus Gregg Ward. Gregg tells me that after graduating with a BFA in acting from CFA in 1982, he went on to live 4 different and distinct lives. In his first life, he was a professional actor, writer, director, and producer in New York City and London. In his second life, he worked as a specialist trainer for the New York City Police Department, using live theater as a training tool. In his third life, he was a freelance journalist on assignment throughout Europe for BBC Radio and other UK media. And his latest life is what he does now. He serves as an author, speaker, consultant, trainer, and executive coach for corporations and government. Gregg is here today to talk about boosting your emotional intelligence, which is based on his best-selling and award-winning book, The Respectful Leader: 7 Ways to Influence Without Intimidation. This was published by John Wiley & Sons back in 2016. Now, one last interesting thing about Gregg is that he's also a Little League umpire in his spare time. And he's found that the children out on the field can generally be counted on to behave like respectful little adults. And the adults in the stands can pretty much be counted on to behave like big, disrespectful children. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome celebrated author, expert facilitator, and courageous umpire, Gregg Ward. Gregg, thanks for being here today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to take you back to 1983 when I was a starving actor in New York City, and I need to pay the rent. So I took a job as a temp worker in the Office of Special Programs of John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And the dean of that office had just won a major contract to provide training to the police department. And he needed somebody to key into the computer all of the different materials and training manuals that were being handed out. And that's what I was hired to do, to key in all that information. And so the dean gave me a very high-tech piece of equipment to help me do my job. And does anybody remember the Apple IIe computer? This, believe it or not, was cutting-edge technology in its day. Back then, it was the best of the best. It also had a tendency to crash. If you didn't save your work, on that floppy drive there on the screen to the left of the computer. If you didn't save your work on a regular basis, you were going to lose it. And so a couple of days before the training was due to begin, I was working very, very hard to get all the data into the computer. And did I save my work on floppy disks as I was supposed to? I did not. And 11 o'clock in the morning, about 3 days before the training was supposed to begin, it crashed and I lost a good 4 or 5 days worth of work. I was devastated. I was very upset. And I was very concerned that I was going to lose my job. And when I went in to tell the dean what had happened, I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd cursed like a sailor and just tossed me out of there. But he didn't. He took a very deep breath. And he said to me, well, Greg, no babies have died here, which I thought, okay, fair enough. And then he said, I can tell you're very upset about this. And I said, sir, I am devastated. I am so sorry. I apologized 1,000 times. And he said, now hang on, here's what you're going to do. I'm not going to fire you. You are going to go home and you're going to get yourself together. You're going to collect yourself. And then you're going to come back here tomorrow morning and you're going to start up again where you lost and to see if you can recover everything in time. And I did go home and I did collect myself, but I didn't come back the next morning. I actually came back that night and I pulled an all-nighter and desperately worked as quickly as I could, even though I wasn't getting paid because I was a temp worker after all, and trying to put all that data back in. And the next morning when the dean came in and saw me there, he was stunned to find me, and he was stunned to find out that I had recovered nearly 2/3 of what I'd lost. Well, we met the deadline, we got the work done, and eventually the dean offered me a full-time position in his office. Now, the reason I tell you that story is because the dean displayed something that we knew nothing about back then, which was a very high level of emotional intelligence. And essentially, that's what this webinar is about. What is emotional intelligence? What's the impact on others of your emotional intelligence? What's the value to you? And I'm going to introduce some skills and techniques to help you boost your emotional intelligence, which is also known commonly as EQ. I'd like you to have a paper and pen ready for later on. I'm going to introduce a little tool that'll help you boost your skills. So I do want to also offer you an opportunity to win some free coaching with me. All you have to do is follow me on LinkedIn today by midnight Pacific. And that's basically 14, 15 hours from now. And just go to LinkedIn and look me up, Gregg Ward with 2 G's at the end. And your name will be entered into a random drawing if you follow me by midnight Pacific. There'll be 3 winners of 30-minute spot coaching sessions with me. Now, what's the big idea with emotional intelligence? You know, a lot of people talk about it. And there's a fundamental idea behind it, which I think is really important that we make sure everybody gets on the same page with. Emotional intelligence, or EI, or EQ, is just as, if not more important to your success as your IQ. And in fact, the higher up you go in any organization, the more your EQ or EI will matter. Now, let me back up a second. I'm going to take a quick poll, and I'm going to ask Dan to get on and put that up in front of you. I'm going to ask how many of you have actually taken an IQ test at some point in your life. So go ahead and indicate if yes, you have, or if no, you haven't. And I suspect quite a few people on this webinar have indeed taken an IQ test. But the second part of the poll is this: whether or not you've taken an IQ test, do you believe a person's IQ can change over time? Either yes, a person's IQ can change, or no, a person's IQ is constant, keeps going, it is the same. So I'm going to ask folks to go ahead and take that poll.
It looks like we've got about 75% of folks who have participated already. So we'll let any last minute responses come in, and then I can go ahead and share those results with all of you.
Great. And I'm already seeing that folks are following me on LinkedIn. Thank you all very much. Well, there we are. It's nearly 50-50. At least half, almost half of you have taken an IQ test at some point in your life. And there seems to be quite a few folks who believe a person's IQ can change. And there are a number of folks who think a person's IQ is constant. So a little bit of reality about IQ. If we can close that up, Dan, that'd be
Sure.
great. A little bit of reality about IQ. Essentially, IQ can change when you're in your adolescence. There's no question that as you develop and you learn more in your adolescence, your IQ can go up. But all the research tells us that once you reach the what we call the emerging adult status in your mid-20s or late 20s, your IQ, even if you take the test over the course of your life, is not going to change very much. So yes, it can grow and develop over the course of your adolescence, but once you reach full of adulthood, your IQ will not fundamentally change. However, there's a theory that was developed back in the 80s by Dr. Howard Gardner, professor at Harvard University. He talked about something that he called the theory of multiple intelligences. He used to say, you know, IQ isn't enough. IQ isn't just a good enough or a robust enough measure of who we are and how intelligent we are. He theorized that there are many different intelligences, including visual or spatial intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, also known as body smarts, interpersonal intelligence, people smarts, intrapersonal, self smarts, mathematics, music, natural, being in tune with nature, and existential or deep question smart, and of course verbal smarts, word smarts, being able to use words well or write them well. So that was a theory of multiple intelligences. And sure, there are a lot of folks who work in the IQ business who say, you know what, that's too broad a definition of intelligences. But I tend to believe that Dr. Gardner is onto something special there. And what emotional intelligence is not about is your IQ. It's much more about your interpersonal skills and your intrapersonal skills, your people smarts and your self smarts, the ability to understand yourself and the ability to understand the emotions of others. So what we have found is that the important thing to remember about emotional intelligence is you can develop it throughout the entire course of your career and your life, all the way from birth all the way to death. And that unlike IQ, which becomes fixed at some point in your life, emotional intelligence can develop throughout your entire life. And essentially, what is it? What is EI or what is EQ? It's your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and in others, and your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and your relationships. In short, emotional intelligence is your heart and your head working together. Now, why should you care? Why is this important? I suspect many of you do care about this, but let's talk about some fundamentals. Why is this so important, especially in the workplace? Well, Dr. Michael Rock, who's the author of EQ Goes to Work, has been looking at EI and the results of high EI over the course of many, many years. And what he posits is this: people typically attribute the lion's share of their success personally and professionally to their IQ. But the research that's being done over the last 20 to 30 years is that actually emotional intelligence seems to be a much more significant contributor to personal and professional success. And that IQ, yes, is important, but EI appears to be even more important, especially as you become a more senior, more experienced leader in your organization. Is it possible to be incredibly successful based solely on your IQ? Yes, of course. But even Einstein, had he known and understood what emotional intelligence was all about, would probably have said that as he grew older, he realized that his ability to get his ideas across to others in a way that they could understand and manage their expectations around his brilliance was due to his emotional intelligence and not much due to his IQ. So here's some statistics which I think are going to be very helpful to you. They were developed by Dr. Travis Bradberry, the author of Emotional Intelligence 2.0. What research is telling us is that 90% of top performers in most organizations have very high EQ. They might also have a high IQ, but 90% of top performers, even those who don't have high IQ, have high EQ. Isn't that interesting? Secondly, your performance in your job is responsible for 58% overall due to your EQ. So your EQ plays a significant role in your job performance. Now, if you think about, practically speaking, what kind of jobs where EQ is needed? Well, quite frankly, any kind of job where you have to interact with others on a regular basis. I'm thinking customer service. I'm thinking management of any team. I'm thinking any kind of industry or group or organization where you have to work with, collaborate, partner, and lead other people. Your EQ, your self-awareness of your own emotions and your awareness and able to management of those and of the emotions of others is incredibly important. Sure, if you are sitting in a windowless room working on computer code your entire career and your interactions with other human beings is limited, okay, fair enough. Maybe EQ doesn't really come into play there. But for most of us, we don't do that. Most of us do interact with others on a regular basis, and that's where our EQ comes in very, very valuable. Now, here's a statistic which just makes my jaw drop. According to Dr. Bradberry, if you look there on the right-hand side of your screen, $29,000 is the amount that people with high IQ make more annually than their low EQ counterparts. Now, don't know how they came up with that figure, but it's pretty astonishing. And yet, if you think back carefully, if you look at the data, look at the people in your organization, is it possible that high EQ people do earn that much more than their counterparts? Yeah, I think it is possible. And that's kind of a nice thing to have, I would think, for most people. Okay, so breaking down emotional intelligence a little bit more into 4 what I call active modes. These are things that you have to pay attention to if you're going to have a high level of emotional intelligence. You have to be actively involved in paying attention and managing these things. The first is quadrant 1. That's the self-awareness part of emotional intelligence, actually recognizing and naming the emotions that you're actually feeling at any given moment. And I'm going to give you a little tool later on that will help you do that. So once you're aware of your own emotions and you recognize them, do you need to manage them in some way? Are you impacting others in a way that's negative? So self-management is quadrant 2, and that usually comes quickly after self-awareness and self-recognition of emotions. The third quadrant is called social recognition and awareness. This is where you're able to pick up on the emotions of others, to sense what's going on with them. And if you think about this for a moment, how many of you walk into your office or your workspace where there are other people and you see someone and you could just tell, not even by asking them, but just by looking at them or getting near to them, they're giving off a certain vibe and you're thinking, something's up with them, something's wrong or something's different, something's up, and you haven't said a word to them. That is a level of emotional intelligence. You're able to sense somebody's vibe without even asking them. And of course, if you ask them, they'll say, wow, how did you know? Something is up with me. Well, that's because you've developed your ability to recognize the emotions in others. And then finally, once you're good at becoming aware and naming your own emotions, and you're managing your own emotions, and you're also aware of the emotions and able to name the emotions of other people, then comes what's called quadrant 4 social management, where you've developed the skills to be able to manage the emotions of others in a way that is positive and productive. So these are the 4 active modes of emotional intelligence, and the key word here is active. You gotta be focused on these things. Now, I know it's not easy sometimes. We get deep down in the weeds of our technical challenges, and we kind of go unconscious to these things. But my experience working over many, many years, coaching people and serving in organizations, my experience is that those folks who are actively doing these things have turned on the switch, are much more able to be productive themselves and manage themselves better, and also able to manage the emotions of the groups they either lead or are part of. So some of you might be saying, okay, well, I'd love to take an assessment. I'd love to get a sense of where I am on the emotional intelligence continuum. And I can tell you there are tons. There are literally 20, 30, 40, 50 different assessments online. All of them, or many of them, are validated. They've been around for quite a while, and they're very, very helpful in giving you some sense of where you are on the continuum. Now, Dr. Bradbury has developed a list that he says if you've got high emotional intelligence, it's essential that you have met these 18 criteria. For example, you have a robust emotional vocabulary. That's basically the ability to use language, either written and or spoken, to successfully articulate the emotions that you're feeling and the emotions of others. So you have a breadth of vocabulary that can specifically identify particular emotions. Secondly, you're curious about people. You want to know what's up with them, what's going on with them. Third is you embrace change on a regular basis if you have high emotional intelligence. You also know your strengths and your weaknesses. You're a good judge of character. You are difficult to offend. Now, you'll notice you'll see a bunch of check marks there. I've tried to look at myself as dispassionately as I could, and I feel fairly confident that I have developed out of these 18 competencies, I've developed about 13 of them, and I need to do some work on others. For example, embracing change is not necessarily the easiest for me. Also, number 6 and 7, you are difficult to offend. I'm actually a pretty sensitive guy, so I'm pretty easy to offend. I do not have a thick skin, and it's something I need to develop. But as I said earlier, this is what happens over the course of your entire life. You can develop these skills. You know how to say no to yourself and others. I'm terrible at this. Somebody asks me to do something or needs a favor or help, I'm immediately there to say yes. Hard for me to say no. Letting go of mistakes, I'm pretty good at that. You give and expect nothing in return, I'm pretty good at that. I have actually found that part of emotional intelligence, you get a great sense of satisfaction when you give and help others and expect nothing in return. You actually give yourself, it's a little neuroscience here, you give yourself a little hit of oxytocin when you do something for somebody else just as a gift, as a favor, and you to expect nothing in return. You actually feel very good about yourself. And this is generally considered part of high emotional intelligence. Number 10 is not holding grudges. That's taken me a while to develop, but I've learned to do it because I found that when I hold grudges, the only person who gets harmed by that or taken down a notch on that is me. The people I'm holding grudges against don't even know it or don't care. Neutralizing toxic people. It took me a while to learn how to do that. I'm still practicing that, but I'm getting better at it. And I can tell you from all my work with many different organizations over the course of many years that this is one of the skills that senior managers with high emotional intelligence have developed to a very high degree. Neutralizing toxic people is something that a lot of us are not that good at, and for various reasons. And yet it is an extraordinarily important skill. Number 12 is you don't seek perfection. And you know what? BU graduates, in my experience, are really smart, highly educated people. And there are a lot of perfectionists out there among us. And that's great. It's wonderful, especially if you work in engineering and in the sciences. But sometimes seeking perfection can be the enemy of good enough, and we don't move forward. So I would urge all of us, if we can, in the right places, be okay with good enough, and don't make perfection the enemy of good enough. Number 13 is appreciating what you have. You know, we're all in different places in our lives. We've gotten to where we've gotten, or we haven't gotten where we want to be. But at the end of the day, we have found that people with high EI tend to appreciate what they have, no matter how little or how much they have. And I've been very fortunate. My career has done well. I'm blessed. I'm fortunate. And I wake up every day so appreciative of everything I have. I'm very grateful. And yet I also know that if I didn't have all of these things, that the success that I've had, I also know I'd be very appreciative to just have the opportunity to try to make a difference in the world, and to be with family and friends whom I love and whom love me. And that's the most important thing, being able to make a difference. Disconnecting, you know, sometimes it's really hard for us. I run my own company. I have people who are dependent on me. It's hard to disconnect, and I suspect many of you are in the same boat. You tend to check your email on the weekends. When you go on vacation, you take your laptop with you, and you keep working, you're working. And it took me a long time to realize that I needed to disconnect in order to be my best self. And so now I'm much better at that. It took me a while to learn it, but I'm much better at it. But what I'm not good is limiting my caffeine intake. This is, believe it or not, high emotional intelligence. If you limit your caffeine intake, I'm not good at that. And I don't get enough good sleep. And that's probably due to the fact that I'm using too much caffeine. I'm working on it. It takes time. Now, one of the most important high EI competencies actually stop negative self-talk in its tracks. Many of us beat ourselves up. We're really good at being our own worst critics. And so one of the things we have to learn how to do is stop negative self-talk in its track as soon as possible, because it doesn't help us in any way, shape, or form. We have to transform the conversation in our heads. How do we get out of that negative beating ourselves up and think about, well, what could we do better in the future? That's a conversation that's easy to say. It's a lot harder to do. And finally, number 18, and boy, do I agree with this one, you won't let anyone limit your joy. That includes family and friends, or the people who tell you, you can't do that, you can't succeed. And my response is, yes, I can, and you're not going to stop me from being happy. You're not going to stop me from limiting. You're not going to stop me and limit my joy. I'm going to be joyful as much as I darn well please, and nobody's going to stop me. So those are what Dr. Bradbury believes are the high competencies of high emotional intelligently people. So I'm going to drill down into the 4 modes of emotional intelligence just a little bit more. So this self-awareness recognition part of it is basically being conscious to yourself of what's going on and being able to name and identify your own emotions. Use language that can identify it clearly. Self-understanding, knowing who you are and where you're at in your life, and conducting an accurate assessment of yourself, and having the confidence, not so much arrogance, but having the confidence to know I'm doing okay at something, I'm doing okay at this emotional intelligence thing, and I'm going to get better, instead of being arrogant about it and saying I'm terrific at this. That's not what it's about. Doing a realistic personal appraisal and staying motivated even though times are tough or you feel like beating up on yourself. So that's Q1. Q2 is self-management, self-control. When things get tough, do you beat yourself up to a point where it's completely inappropriate and unhelpful? Can you stay disciplined through challenging times? Are you trustworthy? Can people trust you to honor what you say? Are you transparent? Especially in leadership, this is extraordinarily important. The last thing we want to do is have our teams think that we're not telling them the truth about what's going on. Now, sure, there are sometimes you can't say some classified information or you can't reveal what's happening in the near-term future for legal reasons or other reasons, but are you making an effort to be transparent about where you're at, where the organization is at, and what's going on? Can you adapt? Can you adapt to hits? Can you take the hit and move on and figure out a way to move forward? Can you pat yourself on the back? You know, sometimes our bosses don't take the time to celebrate us or pat us on the back. So can we pat ourselves on the back and say, I did a good job, not in an arrogant way, but in a confident way, and now I'm going to move on and do even better? So can we celebrate our own achievements? And do we have the initiative and success to get up in the morning, even though we're doing our own thing and running our own companies? Can we stay focused and drive ourselves towards success and generally stay optimistic, even when things go badly? That's sometimes really hard to do. Social recognition is all about empathy. You have heard people talking about empathy for decades now. And what we are finding is that the highest emotionally intelligent leaders have an enormous amount of genuine empathy. And empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is being able to sit with someone and understand their feelings, to show an understanding that you know that they're going through a hard time. Sympathy is basically you understand from your own experience what they might be feeling like. But empathy is actually taking it a step further and comforting them and understanding them and helping them understand that you know that they're going through a very tough time. Can you also be a service-oriented person? I talk a lot about in my work what I call respectful leadership, and you may have heard of something called servant leadership. And servant leadership is having an attitude essentially that you are of service to others and to your organization. You're a caretaker of the people you lead and you're of service to them. So I consider that part of respectful leadership as well. And can you serve others in first before you serve yourself? Are you aware of what's going on with your organization? Can you recognize the challenges that people are facing emotionally and also organizationally? And can you keep a connection going with your team and make sure that they are heading in the proper, productive, and emotionally healthy directions? And can you also recognize when the team's in trouble emotionally? And are they falling apart? Are they starting to point fingers at each other? Are they causing problems, which leads to finally social management? Are you a good coach to your friends and your colleagues and also to the people who report to you? Can you mentor the people who report to you or others in your organizations who are 2 or 3 levels down? Can you help those who aren't being helped to succeed as well as you've succeeded? Can you influence others to go in directions that you want them to go? Can you show leadership and champion change? Can you build strong relationships with the people that you're working with so you can generate teamwork and collaboration? So social management is the highest mode of active emotional intelligence. This is where you're going to have to be very focused, have a high levels of skill, and it does take time and effort and experience and mistakes to develop in quadrant 4, social management. Okay, so I want this webinar to be very practical for all of you. So I'm going to introduce something that I call a skill boost. And we're going to do this first on quadrant 1, self-awareness. Here is where a piece of paper and a pen are going to be handy. I want you to draw on this piece of paper a window, a 4-quadrant window, just like you're seeing on the screen. So take a moment and quick sketch out that window. So this is going to be an emotionally intelligent snapshot of you right now. Okay, Then what I want you to do, once you've drawn that little window there, is I want you to draw a double-sided line, a double-sided arrow line at the bottom. Now this is going to be the continuum of happiness / contentment. And then on the left-hand side, I want you to draw a vertical axis, double-sided arrow, this is going to be your energy and motivation. Okay, once you've done that, and I'll keep this obviously on the screen so you can see what you're doing, I'm going to ask you to take a pencil or a pen and make a mark first on the lower line. How happy and content are you right now? Are you very unhappy? Do you have no contentment at all? Then you probably make the mark all the way down on the left-hand side by the number 1. 1 being the bottom of the continuum and 10 being the top. If you're totally happy and content right now, then you would put your mark all the way near the 10. One thing I don't want you to do is please don't put it in the middle because it messes up my little tool here. So try to put it to the left or to the right of the middle. That's your contentment and happiness. Now, I want you to take your pencil or pen and mark on the other line on the left-hand side. How energized, how motivated are you to go forward today with whatever you're working on? Once we're done with this workshop, this webinar, I want you to try and figure out how energized are you to go forward with your day. Make a mark somewhere along that continuum, 1 being no energy whatsoever, no motivation, and 10 being totally energized, totally motivated. Now, once you've made that mark, and please don't do it in the middle again, I want you to draw a line all the way through the quadrants from the bottom line and from the left-hand line. So draw a line and look to see where those 2 lines intersect. What quadrant do they fall in? Do they fall in, here they're color-coded, do they fall in the yellow or the green or the blue or the red? In my case, right now, I did this just before I got online with y'all. I found that I'm pretty happy and I'm pretty content. So around a 7 there. And so I marked it there and drew my line up. And then I'm pretty energized and motivated to go on with the rest of my day. I've got some projects lined up, some phone calls to do. I'm very excited about those. And so I'm landed in what's known as the gold quadrant. So here are the words. These are the words that I would use in the gold quadrant that describe how I'm feeling right now. I'm excited, I'm enthusiastic, I'm energized, I'm pumped up. If I was in the green quadrant, it's very likely that I would use these words to describe my emotions: chillin', satisfied, calm, focused. If I'm in the blue quadrant, I'd be kind of blue, be kind of blah, meh, whatever. And then if I was in the red quadrant, it's likely I'd be angry, frustrated, annoyed, or shut down. So what I'd like you to do is, are there any words that you see on the screen in the quadrant that your lines have intersected? And do any of these words seem to be right for you? Or are there other words that you want to use? So the reason I'm having you do this is one of the core competencies of emotional intelligence is to actually specifically name the emotions that you're feeling. Not just saying, hey, I'm angry or I'm happy, but am I enthusiastic? Am I energized? Am I excited if I'm happy? If I'm angry, what's the angry? Am I frustrated? Am I annoyed? Am I shut down? To be more specific, one of the important tools about self-awareness is to be very specific about the emotions that you're feeling, to use your words, your languaging to name those emotions. Okay, so I call this an EI snapshot, me where I am right now. And you can do this at any time. And in fact, I often tell people, do it at the beginning of your day and then do it at the end of the day. It'll take 2 minutes. And it'll really give you a sense and some practice in being more aware of yourself. Okay, I'm going to give you another skill boost. Since we're all pretty good, in my estimation, at starting to understand where we are emotionally and using language to describe our emotions, how can we manage our emotions? Does shift happen to you? Shift happens all the time. It is imperative that you get your shift together. What the heck is Gregg talking about, you're wondering? Is he saying what I think he's saying? Well, when I say shift, I'm actually talking about your emotional shift. I suspect quite a few of you lead teams who are on this call. You're managers of some kind. And if you're managers or supervisors and you're leading teams, it's very likely that there are going to be problems coming at you all day long. That's kind of your job as a manager, is to solve problems. Well, the thing of it is, we're all human beings, and sometimes we react to these problems, and sometimes our reactions can be quite explosive. So we've got to get our emotional shift together. We have to manage our emotional shifts in the workplace in front of our teams, because if we don't, we are likely to infect them. We are likely to cause problems with others and with the work if we don't manage our emotional shift effectively enough. So how can you get your shift together? One of the easiest ways, the simplest ways, is to breathe. Take a deep, emotionally intelligent breath. Now, some people have said, I'm just going to tell myself to calm down. Never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told or telling themselves to calm down. Calming down is not a cognitive function. It's not something you can think your way through or command yourself or others to do. There are other ways to calm down than telling people to calm down. The simplest way is to just take a deep breath and you will calm down. Secondly, if you don't have a vent buddy, I urge you to get a vent buddy. That's somebody you can talk to and just close the door with for 5 minutes, and you can just go blah, 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 and let out all that emotion, and they will nod and say, yes, wow, yeah, wow, I get it. Are you okay? And you'll eventually get it all out, and you say, yep, I'm fine, thank you very much. It's very likely that that vent buddy is also you're the vent buddy for them as well. This has to be a trusted person who is not going to reveal how you're feeling to anyone. Another thing you could do is just take a walk outside. When you get some bad news or something happens and you're getting all frustrated and upset, just take a walk outside. Science tells us that if you change your physiological state and also get some natural light in your eyes, even if it's raining or snowing, get some natural full spectrum light into your eyes, change your physiology, and you will actually feel better. You could use my patented curse cushion, which is basically a little cushion you put up to your mouth and you let loose into it so no one can hear what you're cursing. That might be useful to you. You could schedule it. This is a psychological technique. You could actually take your problem and open up Outlook or whatever calendar you've got and schedule a time to actually deal with it. Psychologically, this lets you off the hook from reacting and doing something right now, especially if you don't have time to deal with this problem right now. Put it in your schedule, and it's very likely you'll handle it, and you will calm down in that moment. You will get your shift together. Put it into perspective. Ask yourself, is this the worst thing in the world that could happen? Once we've put things into perspective, usually we start to calm down. If you can sleep on it, take the time to let it go overnight and sleep on it. Usually you'll wake up the next morning feeling much better and much clearer about how to handle this problem. Another thing I do is meditate. I bet you many of you on the call are meditators, and I learned it in acting school at Boston University. I still do it to this day. It is incredibly valuable and helpful to me. Bottom line is, if you're a manager and leader, you're going to be faced with problems all the time, and it's imperative that you get your emotional shift together. And these are some of the ways that you can do it. All right, one more skill boost on social awareness and social management. This is a feedback technique. Many of you are in leadership roles, or even as colleagues, you have to give somebody else some feedback. Now, we call it the SBIR technique. It was originally developed by the Center for Creative Leadership, where I am an executive coach. It is really great. It is really helpful. Situation, behavior, impact, and request. So you take the person aside and say, here's the situation. You name the situation that occurred. Say it was a meeting or something like that. Who was there? What was the situation? So that the person you're talking to can remember what it is you're talking about. Then you talk about their behavior. This is what I observed and heard. I often find that people need to get feedback about interrupting others. So I'm going to use that as an example. We're seeing this a lot these days, that people are being interrupted without being able to finish what they're saying. So I would say to the person, hey, this is what I observed, that you were interrupting our colleagues a number of times while they were trying to get their thoughts out. I heard you just interrupt without any kind of apology. And the impact on me is I'm not hearing what the other person has to say. I'm not getting the full impact of their thoughts. It looks on you, the impact on you is it looks like you are okay interrupting other people and behaving disrespectfully. The impact on others is they feel disrespected. And the impact on the organization is it looks like people can interrupt each other all the time and the organization is okay with that. And we know from research and science that that's actually having a negative impact on the organization. So I'd like to make a request of you, which is in this case, not to interrupt your colleagues while they are speaking during the meetings. Now, if you use this SBIR technique with someone, and I urge you to do so, it's very likely the moment you get to the behavior part of it and the impact part of it, they're going to get very, very defensive. So here is the second emotional intelligence tool and technique that you can use to handle their upset, to handle their defensiveness. First of all, you got to hear them out. You got to stop the SBIR technique and hear them out. They are going to either make excuses or say, I didn't mean to do that. And they're going to be emotional. So you have to hear them out and look for the emotions and listen for the emotions that they are feeling. Then the A part of this technique is acknowledge their emotions. Acknowledge what you're sensing that they're feeling. I can hear you're upset, frustrated, and overwhelmed with this feedback. I totally get how upsetting this can be or frustrating it can be to hear this feedback. By acknowledging the emotions, what you're basically doing is causing them to feel heard, like they've actually been understood of where they're coming from. And your job here is to use the HEAR technique to get them to de-escalate, to be able to calm down enough so that they actually hear the feedback you're giving them. Lastly, the R stands for respectful remarks. These are things you can say to help them feel better about themselves and consider what you are saying, the feedback you are giving. So here are some remarks. You could ask permission. Hey, I'd like to ask your permission to talk with you about this and give you some feedback. Now, 9 times out of 10, unless the person's a sociopath, they're going to say, yeah, okay, let's talk about it. And the reason this is so powerful is you're giving them a little power to say no. If you ask permission, they might say no. And you know what? If they say no, I don't want to talk about this, then you know what? Don't do it, because they're not going to be open to it. You'll have to revisit this feedback another time. Another thing you could do is say, would you be open to another point of view? Now, this is interesting. What they're expecting, if you say, would you be open to another point of view, and they say yes to you, what they're expecting is that you will say somebody else's point of view about the feedback that you're giving them. And it'll probably, in their minds, be an impact statement, and they're going to get all defensive again. What I urge you to do first is say, hey, I think your point of view on all of this is we're wasting time in our meetings talking about things that we've already discussed. We need to move forward. So what you're going to do with would you be open to another point of view is you're actually going to give them their point of view first. This, again, makes them feel heard and understood, and they will de-escalate and be more likely to hear your feedback. Another one you could say is, I wouldn't be doing my job. This is a great one, especially if you've got a boss who is let their emotional shift get the best of them. You could say, hey, boss, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't bring this to your attention, that this behavior is having a negative impact on the entire team, especially if you're the second in command and they've asked you to give them feedback on themselves. This is a great way to do it. Another thing you could say is show us a little bit of vulnerability by saying, hey, I'm finding this difficult because we're colleagues, we're friends, you're my client, you're my boss. You're showing a little vulnerability. You do that sincerely. Most people don't want you to be in a difficult situation, so they're going to be a little bit more cooperative. Another thing you could say is expectations. You have to be careful about this, but you could say something to the effect, we're expected to not interrupt each other. We're expected to entertain each other's ideas. Have to be careful about this because some people don't want to be told what's expected of them. They feel like you're patronizing them, so you have to use that carefully. Mutual purpose statements. This makes you out to be an ally and not an adversary. You could say something, hey, we both want everybody to feel respected in our meetings. We both want everybody to have their say in a way that we understand them. So you're making yourself, by stating something that we're both on the same side here, you're making yourself an ally, not an adversary. And then you could also tell them what you do respect them for. This is really important way to get somebody to calm down when you're giving them feedback. Tell them, I respect your experience, your knowledge, your talents, your skills, or the way you treat people. If you genuinely tell someone what you respect about them, they usually will calm down and feel good about themselves and be open to your feedback. And finally, you can use what's called a contrasting statement. You could let them off the hook. You could give them the benefit of the doubt. You could say, you know what? I don't think you meant to get everybody upset at you by interrupting them. I think maybe you were just trying to get things to move along, have a good thing happen, not a bad thing. And this, again, gets them to calm down and feel better about themselves. Okay, so I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but I want to make one final point here, that if you're going to start using some of these techniques, such as SBIR and the HERE technique and respectful remarks, I urge you to practice. If you haven't done them before, practice makes things better. We learned at CFA that practicing is the way to getting to be an expert at something. And boy, did I have to practice a lot when I was at CFA and afterwards. And in a way, I'm still practicing. I'm still practicing all of these tools and techniques and all the work I do, still using theater in my training programs and in my coaching. I've been fortunate in that I've been able to use my training at BU going forward. But I do practice it, and I have a trusted colleague who I can role play with and try out the techniques with, and I urge you to do the same. So if you're going to practice, find someone you can trust. Go to a secure place where no one's going to overhear what you're doing. Try to pretend that it's really happening, that you're really doing this, and have them try to play the role as honestly and truthfully and as believably as they can. And then keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. Debrief with them. If you want, if it's possible, have a third party sit in and watch you do the techniques and give you a critique on how you're doing. So practice does indeed make perfect. So at this point, I hope I've been able to, A, give you a sense of what emotional intelligence is and how it operates, the value to you, and help you boost some of your core active emotional intelligence skills. So I'd like to open up the floor to some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Greg. We do have a couple questions that have come in already. And if you are out there listening and you have a question for Greg, please go ahead and submit it in the Q&A box. So this first question comes from Deb. She was working on the EI Snapshot exercise, and she was having trouble identifying where to rate herself if her emotions and feelings for work were very different from the emotions and feelings that she has in her personal life. So can you talk a little bit about, is there one score that should incorporate maybe an average of both, or would you do separate scores for your work life and your personal life?
And that, Deb, that is an excellent question. Generally speaking, if, for example, your personal life is great and doing really well, but your work life is a real challenge and upsetting to you, those are going to bleed over into each other. And they're not necessarily, you won't really be able to necessarily separate them.
Mm-hmm.
So in my experience, the best use of the snapshot is just accept that whatever's going on in your personal life is also going to be reflected to a certain degree in your work life. And vice versa. Whatever's going on at work is probably going to be reflected to a certain degree at home and in your personal life. It's pretty hard for us these days, especially those of us who are working 60, 70 hours a week. It's pretty hard for us to separate the personal from the professional. Mm-hmm. So just assess yourself as best you can in this moment and going forward. If you're at work right now and you're anxious about what's going to happen in the future today, the rest of today, then mark the motivation and energy part of it appropriately. And the same with the happiness and contentment part. But it's not really possible in my experience to separate the two. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. We've got another question here. So let's say you're someone who has really worked intentionally to build these skills, build your competency in emotional intelligence. How would you recommend someone convey those skills in either a resume or a cover letter? Is there a way that you've seen these skills marketed? And is it any different from how you would market your other hard skills?
Wow, that's a cool question. I'm trying to think if I wrote a letter to say I'm a highly emotionally intelligent leader, it might come off to others as arrogance. Mm-hmm. But you could, I think, and I'm thinking of this off the top of my head. It's an excellent question. I would say you could say that my teams and colleagues have reported that I have a developed level of emotional intelligence, that I do focus on it. So you could say others have reported as such. And assuming you have a LinkedIn profile, you can ask people who are giving you any kind of testimonial to say that, hey, Gregg is a highly emotionally intelligent leader. They can use the language for you. It's always better to have someone else tout your emotional intelligence rather than tout your own, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Going back again, early on, you addressed the fact that there are, any number of EI self-assessments out there. How quickly would you say you can retake a self-assessment to see if you really are building some of those EI skills? Is it something that you feel like people can, if they're working on it very intentionally, can you start to see results in 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year's time?
Yes, that's a great question. I can tell you from my experience with coaching executives that if I have a coachee who is really invested in wanting to develop their emotional intelligence, we can do the assessment at the beginning, see where they're at, and then within a matter of 3 months, and usually I meet with them on an average of 2 to 3, I coach them on an average of 2 to 3 times a month, they can, within 3 to 6 months, show some significant improvement on their emotional intelligence. The other way to find out is to ask others. If you're wanting to and you're open to this, go to your team and say, hey guys, you know what? I'm going to be developing my emotional intelligence skills, and here are the things I'm going to be working on. I'd like to check in with you periodically to see how I'm doing, and I'd like you to be honest with me. Now, of course, that presupposes that you have a high level of trust and that your team will tell you the truth. But usually there's somebody in your circle who is secure enough in their job and secure enough with you that they will tell you the truth. That person's going to be helpful, especially if you give them specific metrics that you want them to look at.
Great. And I have a question that's just coming from my viewing and following along of your webinar. One of the things that I noted was that you indicated that you had really worked on building your skills when dealing with toxic people. I think it was neutralizing toxic people. What are some of the things that you did to build those skills? Do you have to go out and intentionally, work with people who might be toxic to build some of those skills, or are there other ways to go about it?
Well, there are two things that have to happen. If you're in a position where there's an expectation of you as a leader, as a boss, by your team, even if the company doesn't formally put it in your annual performance evaluation that you're expected to handle toxic behavior. The reality is, if you're a leader or a manager or a boss, you are. There is that expectation by your team that you're going to manage the person who's behaving in a toxic way. And if you don't, they will lose respect for you. So the first thing you've got to do is nip it in the bud. You've got to address toxic behavior early on before it grows into significantly damaging behavior. So that's one thing, and I would do that using the SBIR technique and the HERE technique and respectful remarks. That's one way you could do it. Then over time, you also would want to continue to monitor that person and work with that individual, assuming that they, A, haven't done something that necessitates them being terminated, and B, they are willing to address their own behavior, because you can lead that horse to water, and if they don't want to drink, there's nothing you can do. So you would have to work with them over time to see if they're willing to change. Not easy to do. And if they aren't, then you have to consider more formal disciplinary processes, such as put them on a performance improvement plan, or they have to be transferred, or they have to be terminated. And I can tell you from my experiences, this is the biggest problem for most managers. They're afraid, or they don't have the skills or the knowledge or the backup from their organization to handle toxic behaviors well. And that's a big challenge.
Absolutely. I can't believe we've already come back up to the top of the hour, and I do want to be respectful of your time and the time of all our participants. So I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for making this offer. Again, if you are out there and you followed along, we'd encourage you to go ahead and follow Gregg on LinkedIn, and you'll be entered into that drawing to win some a 30-minute coaching session. There will be 3 winners, I think you said. Is that right, Gregg?
That's correct. 3 winners will receive 30 minutes of coaching. It'll be a random drawing if you follow me by midnight tonight. If you'd like a PDF of the slideshow, just send it to hello@greggwardgroup.com. And if you'd like to purchase my book, please go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble and select the paperback version. That's the new updated version. And thank you all. It's been a pleasure. I hope I've been helpful.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all this wisdom on emotional intelligence. It's certainly a hot topic, so we appreciate you delivering it to the alumni community.
Thank you.
And my thanks also go out to all of our guests who watched along and participated, asking great questions. I specifically want to thank all those of you who are donors. If you've donated to BU in the past, we certainly couldn't do programs like this without your support. And if you haven't made a gift this year, we're coming up on June 30th, and that's a really important day for BU. It's the end of our fiscal year, and it really is about alumni participation. So a gift of any size, please know how appreciated that gift is. The alumni participation score, that goes into BU's rankings. And so again, a gift of any size before June 30th, we certainly appreciate it.
I got my checkbook out, Dan.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. I do want to note that we have another webinar coming up next month that you won't want to miss. On July 16th, we'll host How to Overcome 3 Common Challenges That New Managers Face. You can sign up for that webinar on our website, bu.edu/alumni/webinars. And in the meantime, I'd encourage all of you to check out the Alumni Career Interview Series. It's a podcast called Proud to BU. We talk to some of the most interesting and accomplished BU alumni. They share some of the lessons that they've learned, since leaving BU and building their careers. It's really great. I really enjoy listening to it, and you can start listening now wherever you get your podcasts, or you can find it on our website, bu.edu/alumni/podcast. As always, if you or any BU alumni you know would be interested in presenting a professional development webinar, or if you have a topic you'd like to showcase for the Alumni Association, please feel free to contact me. You can reach me in the Alumni Relations Office or by email at dangard, DANGARD, @bu.edu. Thanks everyone for your time, and I hope you have a great day or a great evening wherever you might be. Thanks again, Greg.
Thank you.